David Learmount is an aviation expert and consulting editor at Flight Global, and he joins us now. Good to see you, David. Look, to come down from cruising altitude, that's very rare, isn't it?
It's very rare that accidents begin in the cruise because the aeroplane and the crew is very unstressed. The aircraft's just proceeding in a straight line. The engines are not at full power, so and the crew have, well, less to do in the cruise than they have during, let's say, the takeoff, the descent, or the landing. So for something to go so very, very wrong in the cruise, that is extraordinarily unusual.
There is a lot we don't yet know about this crash. If there are any mayday calls, flight information, you know, what do you need to see to make a more comprehensive analysis?
Quite a lot more, really. However, the only useful thing that you can do at a time like this is to look at the very little that you do know and look at what you were expecting to see but didn't. For example, you mentioned it yourself. There was no emergency call here. Normally, if something goes very wrong with an airplane, the crew have plenty of time to put out a mayday call, an emergency call to tell air traffic control that they're in trouble. But the crew didn't do it this time. Of course, nowadays we know rather more than we used to know in the old days when an aircraft suddenly goes missing, because we can track track flights on these new apps, which enable just ordinary people to see whether their relatives are about to arrive at your local airport or whatever it is. You can track the flight itself. And one thing we do know about this is that the aircraft, which was proceeding on its normal course from Kunming to Guangxi, and it didn't go off that course at all. It just went into a descent, and it looks as if the descent was very, very rapid.
I've heard one report that says it descended rapidly and then it went up again. I mean, might that help flight investigators work things out?
I'm not entirely sure that piece of information will turn out to be true. No, it looks as if the aircraft went down. Now, in about 10 minutes or so, beyond that point in the flight, the crew would have been preparing to descend into the destination airport. But at that point, there was no reason for a descent, no reason whatsoever. Now, there are certain circumstances in which a flight needs to make an emergency descent if, for example, the cabin pressurization fails because there is some kind of damage to the fuselage and all the air goes out, and the passengers need to get down to, the passengers and the crew need to get down to a lower altitude where there's enough air to breathe. Then the crew does deliberately descend the aircraft very, very quickly. But once they've got down to about 10,000 feet, they then level out, because at that height there's enough air for everybody to breathe safely. However, this aircraft didn't stop at 10,000 feet, it went straight through it. And so all we can look at now is whether we have seen anything like this before. And unfortunately, we have. There have been a few other accidents in which the aircraft has done exactly what this one has, to descend rapidly on the heading towards its destination and then to hit the ground. And those events involved the crew deliberately doing something. Now, we have no direct evidence that this was the case, but we have seen profiles like this before, and that was what had happened.
So you're talking about situations where it was a human error or something to do with the crew. Let's talk about the aircraft itself, because it's one of the world's most popular planes for short and medium-haul flights. So let's talk about the Boeing 737.
For the Boeing 737, this is not the very latest version. The latest version of the 737 is the 737 MAX, and it got itself rather a bad reputation because of two crashes that happened because of a special software program to modify the aircraft's handling. But on the aircraft, the China Eastern aircraft that crashed, that software didn't exist. That aircraft has an extremely good safety record. There was absolutely no reason why a flight profile like this, a descent at a time like that, would have happened. The aircraft certainly doesn't have a record of suddenly falling apart high in the sky during the cruise. So we're not looking at a problem, I think, with the airplane here. You mentioned perhaps we're talking about aircrew error, but the possibility that we have seen in other cases where the flight profile was very like this, we're talking about a deliberate act by the crew. There was a Germanwings, that was a European airline called Germanwings in 2015, so we're talking about 7 years ago, where the co-pilot, who we subsequently found out was having treatment for anxiety and mental problems, it was determined eventually that the co-pilot had crashed the aircraft on purpose, killing everybody on board.